Hi, I'm Mr. Simons, and in this video we're going to do an introduction to the concept of demand. Now, demand is a very important economic concept. It's a fundamental concept. So in this video, we're going to talk about what demand is, and then what we'll do is we'll talk about how it works in reality with a worked example, and then we'll look at some of the things that moved demand. So some of the factors that changed the level of demand in an economy. So if we think about it pretty simply, demand is how much of a good or service that consumers want at different prices. If we get to something more formal, and I can't remember this definition, if we get to something more formal, what we might say is that demand can be defined as the quantity of a particular good or service that consumers are willing and able to purchase at various price levels at a given point in time. Consumers won't want the same amount of a good at all prices. That generally, if we talk about normal goods, and we'll get into that in future lessons, if we talk about sort of regular goods, that the more expensive it is, the less you want of it. So that the cheaper a good or service is, the more that consumers are likely to want to purchase of that particular good. So from these definitions and these ideas, we can go into this thing called the law of demand, the law of demand. Now, it's not a formal law. You can't really break the law of demand and get put in jail. That the law of demand is all about this idea that the higher the price, the less that consumers are willing to want to purchase. The law of demand states as the price of a product goes up, so the price of a good or service rises, that consumers will wish to purchase less of this product. And what we can do is we can say that there is an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded. The lower the price, the higher the quantity demanded. As one goes up, the other goes down. As one goes up, the other goes down, so that we can see that there is this inverse relationship between these two concepts. So in terms of the relationship, we could see that as price went up, so as there was a rise in price from 2 to 4, 6, 8, 10, that you can see that quantity demanded steadily decreased. So as price went up, quantity demanded fell. So what we'll do is we'll display this graphically. I'm not going to do every point. I'll just kind of give you the overview here. So if I create the axes and I'll say, okay, well then this would be price. This will be our point 0, and this would be quantity demanded, because we're focusing here on demand. So if we look at the first point, for example, that price is $2 and quantity demanded is 20. So if price is $2, let's say that that's roughly there. Quantity demanded, let's say that 20 is roughly there, and that equates to this point here. And then if we go all the way to the other end, as price gets to its highest point, let's say that that's 10, and then 10 corresponds with 4. So that would be roughly here, and that would be that point there. So if we then created the line that goes through all of these points, that's roughly what it would look like, that would be our demand curve that goes through these points. So we'd call that D, that as price falls, quantity demanded will rise. That is the essential relationship that we are showing in terms of this graph. Okay, now let's have a look in terms of the factors that affect demand. So what we're looking at is what are the factors that lead to different levels of demand in an economy. And we've got a couple that we're going to go through. So let's just, take them one at a time, huh? So the first factor is the price of the good or service. Now this makes sense because we've just looked at the law of demand, and we know that as the price of a good gets more expensive, consumers are going to demand less. Now, obviously there are exceptions and we will get into them, but for this kind of early stage, let's focus on that inverse relationship. So the first factor that will affect demand is the price of the good itself. Now, the second factor that will affect the demand for a good or service, a good and service, a good or service, is the price of other goods or services. And for this, let's look at two types of products, complements and substitutes. Now, a substitute is something that replaces another product. So in terms of, if we're looking at cars, that a Toyota might be a substitute for a Mitsubishi, right? That these could be substitutes for each other. In terms of a complement, these are things that go really well together. For example, maybe you've got bread and butter. Maybe you've got toothbrushes and toothpaste. That these are things that work well together. So we've got substitutes, things that can be replaced for something else. And then we've got complements, things that work very well together. So if the price of a substitute goes up, so let's say we've got Toyotas and Mitsubishis. If the price of Mitsubishis goes up, then demand for Toyotas would rise because these two things are substitutes for each other and the Toyota is now cheaper. So if the price of a substitute goes up, demand for the other good will rise. Now, in terms of a complement, it's a different situation. Because if we think about things that go well together, so let's, for example, say, okay, bread and butter, these things go really well together. If the price of bread goes up, well then demand for butter is likely to fall because these things work so well together. So if the price of a complement goes up, the demand for the original good will fall. Again, if the price of butter goes up, then demand for bread might fall because they are complements. Okay, that's our second factor. So now we're looking at our third factor that affects demand in an economy. And our third factor is expectations of future prices. So let's go into this. So if I expect, let's say I'm talking about a pair of Chuck Taylors, Converse All-Stars, right? Let's say I'm talking about a pair of Chuck Taylors. If I expect that the price of these shoes will rise in 6 months and I'm planning to buy them, I might buy the shoes right now because I know that the price is going to go up in the future. So if I expect that prices will be higher in the future, I will increase my demand right now in the present. Likewise, if I expect that the price of Chucks will, Chuck Taylors, if I expect that that price will fall in a year's time, I'm going to wait. I'm going to reduce my demand now and make it higher later because I know that the price will be cheaper. So expected future prices plays a really big role in demand as well. So another factor that affects demand is in terms of changing consumer tastes and preferences. So let's just imagine that a celebrity is spotted wearing a particular pair of shoes and all of a sudden all the consumers want to buy this pair of shoes. Well, then demand will increase. And likewise, if consumers fall out of love with a particular brand or a product and they no longer want them because it's not so exciting anymore, maybe the celebrity has stopped wearing them, then consumer tastes and preferences will mean that demand will fall in that example. Okay, so another factor that will change the level of demand is in terms of consumer income levels. This is relatively straightforward one, that the higher the level of consumers' incomes, the greater their demand for goods and services. Now, this makes sense because the more money that I have, the more goods and services that I can actually purchase. So the higher the level of income in an economy, the greater the demand for goods and services. So our final factor that affects demand in an economy is a kind of double-barreled factor. So it's really about the size of the population and the age distribution of the population. So the first one, the size of the population, pretty straightforward, that really the larger the population, the greater the number of goods and services that they will demand. That a larger population will want more stuff, so demand will increase in a larger population. Now, the second one is all about the age distribution of a population. And the easiest way I like to think about it is that, let's say we've got an aging population in an economy. Let's say that the age distribution is getting sort of longer in terms of older people in the economy. If there is an aging population, well, that means that there will be greater demand for products that are catered to older people. So if we've got an aging population, we might see increasing demand for walking frames and maybe like pureed foods and maybe aged care as well. That because of the way that the ages are distributed across an economy, that will affect demand for different goods and services. So again, if there is an aging population in an economy, we are likely to see greater demand for goods and services that are focused around that older age group and less for products that are targeting that younger age group because the numbers are smaller. Okay, so in terms of an introduction to demand, this is what we've done. We've looked at what demand is, we've looked at the law of demand, we've drawn the demand curve with a worked example, and then what's really important is we've looked at all of those factors that will shift demand, that will result in demand increasing or decreasing in an economy. Okay, we're going to get further into demand in future videos. Questions in the comments, and as always, thank you very much for watching.